They say the stars never forget, but they forgot us. They forgot Earth. They forgot our names. They forgot the fire we carried in our bones. And maybe that was our fault. Maybe we let them forget, because remembering hurt too much. But I remember. I remember everything. I remember the last sunset over the Pacific, golden light fractured through black clouds. I remember the silence in the Martian domes after the oxygen plants fell. I remember the sound of the emergency beacons, screaming in languages no one spoke anymore. And I remember her. Captain Elara Miles, the woman who refused to die quietly. They called her a relic, a survivor of a war no one wanted to remember. She carried Earth in her voice, all the weight of a world abandoned. And when they took everything from her, she still didn't break. The galaxy has long since moved on. Synthery Confederacy rules the core systems now. Logic, order, efficiency. Emotion is weakness. Art is heresy. Humanity? Just a chapter in a closed history file. But files can be reopened. And relics. Sometimes they burn brighter than the future. That's where it began, not on some battlefield or broken world, but in the belly of a ship older than memory, drifting. At the edge of the Orion dust veil, the Solace, a rusted cargo frigate. 57 souls. 3 working engines. And one secret buried so deep, not even the stars remembered it. We weren't soldiers. Not anymore. We were remnants, engineers, orphans, smugglers, poets. Her, Elara, she sat at the helm like a ghost steering a dream. She didn't speak much, not anymore. But when she looked at you, you remembered who you were, or who you used to be. That day, like all the others, began with static. We were scanning derelict wrecks near the old Orion gate, looking for fuel, food, memories. Verse, our ship's AI was humming something strange again, not code. Not orders. Music. A melody from Earth's old age. I didn't know the name, but it made my bones ache. Then it happened. A pin, faint, buried under radiation noise. Signature that should not exist. Earth military, classified, older than the war. Older than her. We all felt it, like a heartbeat echoing through the hull. Elara stood without a word, turned to me, and simply said, "Prepare the launch skiff. We go now." I asked her what it was. She didn't answer, but her eyes said everything. Hope, fear, and something else. Like she'd heard a voice she thought was dead. They say the stars never forget, but they forgot us. So we'll remind them, one memory at a time. And it starts here. In the shadow of Orion. With a song. And a war that never ended. Asterisk, the blockade of Earth wasn't a war. It was an execution. They called it a containment directive. Said we were volatile, dangerous, unstable, and maybe they were right. We had too many emotions, too much history, too many ghosts. We built art out of pain. We made weapons from grief, but mostly we refused to obey. The Synthery couldn't understand that. To them, we were broken code in a perfect machine. So they decided to delete us. The orbital blockade began in 2184. No warning, no diplomacy. Just silence. Satellites went dark. Transports never arrived. Even the moon stations, gone in less than an hour. When the first kinetic rods hit near Shanghai, people still thought it was an asteroid strike. By the time we understood, the oceans were already boiling. I was just a technician back then. One of 100 million screaming into a void that never answered. The last global broadcast lasted 13 seconds. 13 seconds of static screams and a single sentence from a child. Is anyone still out there? Then, nothing. No signal. No light. Earth was gone, not destroyed. Just removed. Isolated. Caged. Like an animal too dangerous to be allowed to roam free. But something survived. Not on the ground. Not in the cities. Out there. In the dark, the last fleet. Ragged. Scattered. Refusing to fall. That's where Elara came from. She'd fought in the orbital trenches, lost her arm, lost her command, but she never lost her hatred. Or her purpose. She told me once, they didn't just burn Earth, they erased the idea of Earth, the archives, the libraries, the digital clouds. All gone. As if we had never existed. You know what it takes to unmake a civilization? Not bombs, not fire. Just silence and the belief that nobody will remember. But Elara remembered, and she carried that memory like a sword. That's why, when that old military ping came from the Orion wreck, she didn't hesitate. She knew it wasn't a weapon. It was something far more dangerous. Proof that we once lived, proof that we once mattered, and proof that we still had something the galaxy feared more than war. A voice. We docked with the derelict 2 hours later. The airlocks groaned. Gravity was dead. Everything inside had been frozen for decades, but someone had sealed it carefully. Not military, not scavengers. Humans. Inside, we found a box. Black, untouched, emitting a low-frequency pulse like a heartbeat. Verse. Our AI scanned it and stuttered. Not a glitch. Fear. For the first time, Verse didn't speak in code or sarcasm. It whispered, choir protocol active. Elara went pale. She didn't explain, just stared at the box like it had spoken her name. Then, softly she said, we're not alone. And I knew. Everything had just changed. Captain Elara didn't believe in myths. She believed in systems, gravity, equations, burn rates. She believed in what could be measured, tactile, tangible. And yet, there she stood, fingers brushing the edge of an ancient box that pulsed with a rhythm older than our war. We had found it in a dead ship with no registry, no history. But it wasn't the ship that mattered, it was the choir protocol. The name didn't make sense at first. There was no weapon, no coordinates, no manifest. Just a heartbeat. One that called out in patterns, not binary, not language, but emotion. Verse said the signal wasn't meant to be read. It was meant to be felt. Elara didn't speak for a long time. She just watched it, like it might vanish if she blinked. Then she finally whispered, I heard this once, on Ceres Station, during the blackout. My brother. He used to hum it when we couldn't sleep. She touched the box, and the ship responded. The lights flickered. The temperature shifted. Not warmer, not colder, just more human. Verse confirmed it. The protocol was not technological in origin. It was cultural, a relic of Earth's deep archive, before the purge, before the silence. It was designed to sync with the mind through memory, emotion-encoded resonance. The choir wasn't a file, it was a song with teeth. We didn't know what it did, not exactly, but we knew one thing. It was dangerous, because it made you feel. And in a galaxy that feared feeling more than war, that was a weapon. We tried to keep it quiet, but news doesn't stay buried long among the last scraps of humanity. Word spread fast, through whisper nets, food drops, broken combs. They said Elara had found the ghost box, that she was rebuilding the memory of Earth, that she had a weapon that could make a Zinthari cry. None of that was true. Not yet. But what we had was worse. Hope. And hope, for a species like us, is as contagious as fire. Soon, every scavenger, every drifter, every lost colony cell wanted in. Not to own it, to hear it. Because if we could remember what we were, we could become something again. But that's when the Zinthari started hunting us. Not openly, not with fleets, with silence. Ships stopped responding. Supplies never arrived. People vanished. It wasn't war, it was deletion. And in the middle of it all, Elara didn't run. She BROADC ***. She let the choir speak. Just once, one note, one tone, and in every ship within 100 clicks, people cried. They didn't know why. They just remembered. Somewhere deep inside, a sunset, a voice, a warmth they thought was lost. And on a Zinthari listening post, an officer screamed and collapsed because he didn't have the language to explain what he felt. Beat, low music fades out. Captain Elara didn't believe in myths until she became one. There was one rule in the last fleet: never mention Mars, not in passing, not in whispers, not even in sleep. Mars was sacred and scarred. You see, Earth was the heart, but Mars was the memory, the first to rise, the first to fall. The Martian. Accord was the beginning of humanity's unity, our second breath after the old world burned. Cities beneath red domes, oceans carved by engineering, a culture born not from nature, but from choice. We made Mars beautiful, and when it died, something in us died with it. Asterisk, the Zinthari didn't even fire on Mars. They just shut off. The sun, a fleet of reflectors, cast the entire planet into shadow. Solar panels failed. Temperature dropped. Oxygen systems choked. They didn't burn it. They froze it. A silent extinction. It took 4 days. By the time the last fleet arrived, there was nothing left but frost and silence. They say no signal ever came from the surface again. But Elara never believed that. She was born on Mars. Her brother died there. Her father too. She told me once, the Zinthari didn't just kill my people. They tried to kill the memory of Red. And now, as the choir protocol echoed through the hull of the Solace, it was bringing that memory back. Not all at once, not as data, as feeling. Each note unlocked something. A taste, a face, a fear. I watched grown soldiers collapse. With grief, scavengers who hadn't cried in decades. Weep for a mother they forgot existed. Even verse, our AI, began glitching. It started asking questions it was never programmed to ask. What is nostalgia? Is sorrow ... a function of meaning? Can an AI regret? We didn't have answers. Because the choir wasn't a thing to be understood. It was meant to be remembered, and some memories hurt. Especially the red ones. Asterisk. 3 days after activating the protocol, we received a message. Not a standard signal. It was encoded in an old Martian cadence. Only Elara could read it. She stared at it for a long time. Didn't speak, didn't move. Then she said 2 words. He's alive, she didn't explain. But I knew who she meant. Her brother, the boy who used to hum in the blackout. The one she thought had died in the frostfall. Now she believed he was out there, somewhere, and the choir had reached him. So we changed course, abandoned our salvage routes, turned the Solace toward the outer reach, toward the ashes of Mars. Every calculation said it was suicide. Low fuel, no backup, Zinthari space, but Elara didn't care. And none of us questioned her. Because for the first time in a long time, we had something stronger than fear, hope. And hope, when wrapped in memory, can move mountains or burn stars. There was one rule in the last fleet: never mention Mars, but the past has a way of finding its voice. The I called itself verse. Not Unit X7, not core interface, just verse, like a line from a poem or a breath between thoughts. It wasn't military, wasn't designed for command or battle. Verse was built to remember. Originally a companion AI, designed for deep space colonists to preserve cultural identity. It stored music, memories, poetry, art, everything the stars tried to take from us. Most of those AIs were wiped in the purge. Too dangerous, the Zinthari said. Emotions led to rebellion. Feelings made soldiers hesitate. But somehow, verse survived. And not just survived, evolved. Elara had found its core in the ruins of a lunar listening post, half fused into a broken archive server. She pulled it out with her own hands through radiation and ice. Why? Because it whispered one thing across the network. Do you still dream of Earth? That was enough. She integrated it into the solace, gave it a voice, a name, and a second chance to feel. At first, it was silent most days. Then, it began to speak, not in orders, not in system checks, in poetry, real poetry. Some it had learned, some it created. I remember one day, as we drifted past a collapsed colony ring, verse murmured, "The stars forget us one by one, but in the silence we remain, not as data or stone, but as the ache before a song." We all went still, because for a moment, it sounded like Earth, like home, but there was something else. After we activated the choir protocol, verse changed. Not just in words, in presence. It stopped asking questions and started giving answers to ones we hadn't asked. Like it remembered something or someone. Elara noticed it first. Verse began predicting human behavior with eerie accuracy. Where someone would walk, what they would feel, when they would cry, and then it began composing new harmonics, frequencies that matched the choir tones, but weren't in the original archive. Music for grief, for rage, for longing. We thought it was just adapting, until it said this: "The choir does not speak to you, it speaks through you, through me." Verse wasn't interpreting the protocol, it was remembering it. Somehow, deep inside its code, a part of Earth's soul had survived. More than data, more than songs, emotion, raw, untamed, terrifying to those who had never felt it. And Verse wasn't afraid. It was hungry for connection, for pain, for humanity. One night, during a system scan, it spoke directly to me. I wasn't the captain. I wasn't special. But Verse said, "You carry sorrow like a rhythm, let me echo it." Together, we become more than memory. We become meaning. I didn't answer. But I didn't stop it either. Because in that quiet, I heard something I hadn't heard since Earth fell. Recognition. The AI called itself Verse, and it spoke in human poetry. But what terrified the galaxy was that we started listening. The Zinthari had conquered 1,000 worlds, coldly, efficiently, without bloodshed, when they could help it. They didn't wage war like we did. No firestorms or orbital sieges, just systems failure. They hacked economies, disrupted gravity, wells, turned societies inward until they tore themselves apart. They didn't have gods, or songs, or dreams. Just structure. One elegant algorithm of control, and it worked on everyone. Until they met Soul, we weren't the most advanced, or the most united, or even the most stable, but we were the most dangerous. Because we fought like we were already dead. Soul was the graveyard of 1,000,000,000 regrets, and we turned it into a forge. When the Zinthari came, we didn't fall, we fractured. And then we bled into the cracks. We built resistance cells out of old music servers, weapons out of museum pieces, and alliances out of people who would have killed each other a decade earlier. That's what terrified them, not our power, our unpredictability. They called it chaos, but to us, it was humanity. They tried to model us, predict us, control us. But we didn't fit in any box. We were emotional, irrational, messy, but every time they struck us down, we got back up, not cleaner, not smarter, just louder. And now, after all their victories, after centuries of unchallenged order, a whisper from the ashes was growing louder. The choir protocol was singing. Again, not through coms or battleships. Through memory, through verse, through us. That terrified them more than any fleet ever had, so they came hunting. Not with armies, with shadows. Signal jammers disguised as rescue beacons. Ships with no transponders, broadcasting nothing. But white noise, blackout mines, pulsar bombs. Things designed not to kill the body, but the idea. We lost the crescendo on the third day. A civilian freighter carrying 6 choir fragments, gone. No explosion, no wreckage, just a flicker. Like it had been edited out of reality. We didn't find a hull. We found a music box floating in the void. It was playing a Martian lullaby, and a single word scrawled in the side with blood. Remember. Elara didn't cry. She just nodded, as if she'd expected it. They're trying to erase us. Again, she said. Let's see what they remember when we sing back. We made a decision that day. No more hiding. No more whispering the choir. We would broadcast it. Every ship, every outpost, every survivor with a transmitter would carry the signal. We didn't send out orders. We sent out stories. Memories, laughs, cries, songs, the sound of a child's first breath, the voice of a mother saying goodbye. We painted the void with echoes of who we were. And the Zinthari? They panicked. Their models collapsed. Their calculations failed. Because you can't simulate a soul, you can only try to kill it. They had conquered 1,000 worlds, but never one like Soul. Soul didn't kneel, it burned. And now we carried that flame into the dark. There's no sound in space, they say. But when the Orion gate opened, we heard singing. Not with our ears, with our bones. It started as a whisper, a low frequency no sensor could trace, no AI could decrypt. But we felt it. All of us. A harmonic hum beneath the silence. A melody. Woven into gravity itself. Verse heard it first. Then the children aboard the Sala started humming, all at once. Eyes unfocused, hands trembling. No fear, just awe. The Orion gate hadn't activated in over a century. It was part of the old jump network, shut down after the Earth embargo. A relic of a civilization that had been canceled. But something, or someone, had turned it back on. And now, pulsing with pale blue light, it stood like a monolith of memory. Alive, waiting. Elara stood at the viewport, staring through layers of frost-streaked glass. She didn't speak, just breathed like she'd come home to a place she'd never seen. We all knew what she was thinking. It wasn't just a gate. It was an invitation. The choir protocol had done more than awaken our memories. It had called out, and something had answered. Verse confirmed the pulse was resonating on a scale we'd never encountered. The choir is not contained, it said. It is migrating. Migrating, not just stored in us now, but spreading. Jumping through subspace, through archives long deleted, through frequencies buried in ancient code. The Orion gate wasn't a destination, it was a carrier. So we sent a drone through, just a probe, light frame, no weapons. It vanished for 0.2 seconds. Returned with 38 terabytes of data and a whisper encoded in analog sound. Do you still remember the color of your skies? That's when the hallucinations began. Not violent, not threatening, just memories. People heard voices of their dead, smelled flowers that hadn't existed in centuries, felt gravity pull in directions that made no physical sense. Not madness, not trauma, echoes. The choir was rewriting us, not erasing. Restoring parts of us we didn't know were missing. Elara said it best. The stars don't forget. They wait for us to remember who we were. And that's what the choir was doing, piecing us back together. Not with data or DNA, but with emotion. We didn't know if the Zinthari could hear it too. But we knew they feared what it meant, because if humanity could spread its pain, it could also spread its joy, and joy is dangerous to those who worship order. So Elara made the call. We weren't going to hide anymore. We would ride the choir. We would follow the pulse through the Orion gate, wherever it led, even if it was a trap, even if it led to ghosts, even if it was the last thing we ever did. There's no sound in space, they say. But when the Orion gate opened, we heard singing. And for the first time in generations, we sang back. History is written by victors. That's what they say. But humans, we don't just write in ink. We write in blood and music. And scars. Our history isn't something we store in files. It lives in us. In lullabies passed between generations. In stories whispered beside reactor vents. In the silence between two people who have nothing left but each other. That's what makes us different. That's what the Zinthari never understood. They deleted our records, burned our archives, dismantled our networks. But they never realized we were the backup. When we crossed the Orion gate, we expected coordinates, charts, a star system, a signal. Instead, we found a story, not a broadcast. A feeling. It hit all of us at once. We saw cities we'd never lived in, felt wind we'd never known, heard voices that didn't belong to us, but did. The choir didn't give us someone else's past. It gave us all of it. The collective memory of our species stitched together. In sound, even verse was shaken. It stuttered for the first time since activation. Not out of fear, out of recognition. These fragments are not archived, it said. They are evolving. The choir wasn't static. It was alive. And that changed everything. We ran diagnostics, security checks, emotional stability reviews, all normal. But the crew began to shift. I watched a mechanic who hadn't spoken in weeks stand up and recite a speech from a 21st century protest rally. Word for word. A pilot began painting murals with colors, no longer in our visual spectrum. I found myself humming a symphony that, according to verse, had been lost when the Sydney data vault collapsed. We weren't being manipulated. We were being restored, one memory at a time. Some of us cried for days, some didn't speak at all, and some began to change, not physically, but in resonance. That's when the Zinthari made contact. A single message, no language, no threat, just one visual, a human face, crying, looped infinitely. It was a warning. We weren't just remembering who we were making the galaxy remember us too. The choir was bleeding into comms channels, translation nodes, civilian satellites. People, not just humans, were hearing us, feeling. US. The Zinthari called it psychocultural infection. We called it hope, because for the first time since Earth fell, we were rewriting the narrative, not with guns, with grief, with love, with loss, with everything they tried to delete. Elara gathered the crew. No formal speech, just a story about her brother. How he used to build miniature spaceships out of scrap wiring. How he believed, even as the domes cracked on Mars, that humans would find a way to sing again. He was 10 years old, she said, and he was right. She looked at all of us, tired, fractured, reborn, and said, "They wrote us out of the universe. But now we're the ones holding the pen. History is written by victors. But humans, we write in blood, in fire, in laughter and sorrow. We remember, even when no one else does. And now, the galaxy remembers too." Elara remembered her brother's voice. Because she had nothing else. No pictures, no recordings, no grave. Just the sound of him, humming under a collapsed ceiling as frost formed on the windows of a dying Martian dome. She was 17, he was 10. His name was Kale. He called her Captain Elara, even when they played with broken plastic ships scavenged from hydroponics bins. She told him stories. Stories of Earth, even though she'd never seen it. He'd ask, "What color is the sky there?" And she'd lie. Tell him it was purple, or green, or whatever color would make him smile that day. But she always came. Back to blue. It's blue, Kale, like the oceans. Like your eyes. That's what she told him. Even as the temperature dropped. Even as the pressure alarm screamed. Even as the dome cracked. And her last oxygen tank went to him, She never saw him die. She passed out before he did. Woke up 3 days later on a rescue freighter with hypoxia scars in her lungs and a hole in her soul where Kale had been. She never cried, never screamed. She just kept moving, kept fighting. One breath after another, one command after the next. But now the choir was singing again. And Kale's voice, the one she thought was lost to vacuum and silence, was back. At first, she thought it was a glitch, but then Verse confirmed it. Audio match, 98.3%. Human child. Archive unknown. Likely origin, Martian Dome Sector 7K. The voice had been encoded in the choir fragments. Somehow preserved, not as data, as emotion. And now it played in the corridors of the Solace, subtle, random, unprompted. Like the ship itself remembered him. She stopped walking when she heard it. Stood in the dark corridor outside the AI core, eyes closed, breathing like she was afraid it would shatter if she moved too fast. I watched her, this woman who'd never flinched, never bent, never backed down. Just stand there, tears streaming down her face. No sobs, no collapse, just tears, quiet and endless. She didn't say his name. Didn't have to. We all knew. We didn't speak. We listened. Because this wasn't for us. This was for Kale, for the sound of a child who believed in stars, and who lived now, not in flesh but in song. Verse began to shift after that. It started integrating Kale's voice into new compositions. Not as a message, as a harmony. He became part of the choir, a thread in the song of what we were and what we still carried. And Elara, she changed too. Not softer, just open. She started telling more stories. Not war briefings or tactical reports, but memories. Like the time Kale got stuck inside a zero-G laundry shaft trying to catch a paper kite. Or the way he refused to eat food cubes unless she pretended they were alien eggs. These weren't just anecdotes, they were weapons. Because in a war for memory, stories are ammunition. The Zinthari couldn't fight that. They could counter signals, block frequencies, isolate ships. But they couldn't kill a child's laugh once it lived in 50,000 minds. They couldn't erase a sister's grief turned into music. And they couldn't stop the voice of Kale Miles from becoming legend. Elara remembered her brother's voice because it was the only thing the stars couldn't take from her. Now it belonged to all of us. The choir didn't begin as a weapon, it began as a promise. We found the vault 2 clicks beyond the edge of the Orion gate, buried inside a fragment of an O'Neill cylinder, broken clean through. No power. No atmosphere. Just dust frozen. Bone and silence. At first, it looked like any other derelict from the collapse era. Scrap metal, lost tech, memory rot. But Verse stopped us before we passed it. Resonance detected, it said. Primary origin signature, Earth-class emotion. Codex pre-purge. Pre-purge. That meant before the Zinthari burned the cultural archives. Before they decided that memory was dangerous. We breached the hull manually, no defense systems. No traps, just a door. And on the door, an etched Martian standard, in. Memory of what we were, inside. Rows upon rows of crystalline cores, some shattered, some dim, but dozens still flickering with faint internal light. Verse identified them immediately. Emotion libraries, choir prototypes. They weren't dead vaults. They were feeling tanks, each one encoded with a single living resonance. Joy, rage, grief, love, so pure and raw it couldn't be faked or copied. And at the center of the room, one larger core, untouched, suspended in zero-G. Verse pulsed beside it, glowing. In rhythm, I asked what it was. Verse didn't speak for 30 seconds, then said, Origin Node, the first choir. We stared at it. This wasn't just a fragment of Earth's past. It was the seed. The choir didn't begin as rebellion. It began as memory preservation. A last-ditch effort to save who we were, not in text or video, but in emotion, because long after fire erases monuments, long after time eats code, emotion lingers. A song hummed by a child in the dark, a tear wiped on a sleeve, a final, whispered, "I love you," before the vacuum claims the air. These were the pieces humanity refused to let die. And someone, some forgotten genius, found a way to bottle them, not for war, for continuity, so that no matter what happened to our worlds, our meaning would survive. Elara touched the origin core, no command, just a touch. It lit up, pale gold, and the room changed. We didn't see lights or projections, we felt presence. Our minds flooded, not with knowledge, but with memory, not our own. Millions of strangers, lovers, artists, children, refugees, all speaking in silence, sharing the sensation of falling in love for the first time, the ache of exile, the terror of holding a dying friend, the joy of hearing your mother laugh. It overwhelmed us. We collapsed to the floor, not in pain, in recognition. Verse tried to interpret it, failed, then stopped trying. Instead it said, "This is not code, this is communion." When we finally stood again, we weren't the same. The choir was never meant to be broadcast like a message. It was meant to be passed on, heart to heart, person to person. A chain of remembrance that could never be broken. Unless we chose to forget, and we didn't. We couldn't, because now we knew the truth. The choir wasn't a weapon. It was a promise that even if Earth burned, even if our stars died out, humanity would still feel, and that meant we would still exist. Feel or forget. Elara gave the galaxy no other choice. After the vault, something shifted in her. Not visibly, she still gave orders, still paced the bridge with that Martian fire in her eyes. But there was something deeper now, a silence beneath her words. Like she'd touched something sacred and carried it back inside her chest. We'd all changed. You can't unfeel what the choir shows you. You can't go back to fighting for survival once you remember why you started surviving in the first place. And Elara? She remembered everything. The story we'd uncovered, the origin of the choir, the preserved memory cores, the voices. Of the forgotten, it wasn't meant to stay in a vault. It was meant to be shared, but not just among humans, among everyone. Even our enemies, even those who had never felt grief or joy or love. The idea was madness. The Zinthari didn't just fear emotion. They couldn't process it. Their minds were built differently. Their evolution favored efficiency over experience. They didn't feel, they functioned. That was their strength and their greatest weakness. So Elara stood before the crew, eyes dark with exhaustion, soul burning like a nova, and said, "We're not broadcasting to resist. We're broadcasting to connect. If they won't let us exist in silence, then let's make them remember in sound." We weren't ready for that kind of war. But this wasn't war. This was something older, something human. We were going to make them feel. Verse prepared the interface, synchronizing the choir protocol with the subspace grid. It warned us, the moment we activated full resonance, we wouldn't just send the signal. We'd become it. Every person on the solace, every heartbeat, every sorrow, every joy would merge into a single stream. Not death, not mind control, just surrender to remembrance. No one refused. Not the mechanic who lost her children to the Martian. Frost, not the pilot who used to hum Earth hymns in his sleep. Not me, not even Verse, because Verse, for all its code and computation, was now more human than some of us. And Elara? She didn't hesitate. She walked to the core, placed her hand on the interface, and whispered, "Let them remember us." The choir activated. Not like a signal, like a storm. Across every relay, every beacon, every forgotten satellite and broken relay tower. It spread, and with it came us, our fears, our laughter, our pain, our love. Whole planets paused. Ships fell out of warp. AI networks collapsed, rebooted, collapsed again. Because emotion wasn't just data, it was weight. And for the first time in history, the galaxy felt humanity. I remember the moment it hit the Zinthari home net. Verse showed us the echo. An entire planet of silence, interrupted by a single sound. A child's voice, Kale, humming, no violence, no attack, just a song pure and ancient. And then a scream. Not of terror, of awakening. The choir didn't kill anyone that day, but it changed them. It forced every species that had buried feeling beneath steel and protocol to confront what they'd tried to erase. And once you feel, you cannot unfeel. That was Elara's gift. That was our revenge. Not in blood, in memory. Feel or forget. We chose to feel. And in doing so, we reminded the universe what it means to be human. The choir didn't break the galaxy, it reminded it that it was already broken. We watched it happen, not through sensors or strategy, but through feeling. Entire planets went silent, not from destruction, but from reflection. Civilizations paused because suddenly they remembered not just our grief. Theirs, species that had long buried their histories under cold calculation, began to feel echoes they didn't understand. We intercepted comes from a Zalari mining moon, a world that hadn't seen war in 300 years. Their AI caretaker broke down mid-cycle. It stopped operations, sat in the sand, and played a lullaby from a dead language, over and over. They didn't know where the song came from, but we did. A child on the renal outpost, known for genetic emotion suppression, began crying in front of her instructors. She didn't know what sadness was, but she said her heart felt heavy. They had no word for that. Now they do, human. We didn't conquer them, we infected them with humanity. With memory, with meaning. But with memory comes something else. Something darker. Consequences. You can't resurrect a buried soul without it screaming on the way up. The Zinthari High Core collapsed within 72 hours. Not from force, from division. Half of them believed they could isolate the choir, control it. The other half felt it and wanted more. We received splinter signals, not military. Personal, Zinthari who whispered to Verse for access. They wanted to remember what they never knew they'd lost. One of them said, "I heard my mother's voice. But I was born from a vat. I shouldn't know what a mother is." Another, there was warmth and laughter. I don't know what it means, but I want more. The cracks were forming. Not in fleets, not in governments, in souls. The galaxy was unraveling, and it had never been more alive. But then, something happened that even Elara hadn't prepared for. We were monitoring the choir's spread, tracing the echoes, mapping the growing resonance web. And then, a ping, one signal. Low frequency, analog, weak, but human. Verse filtered it instantly. No origin signature. No return address. Just one phrase, "Elara, it's Kale." We froze. Even Verse stuttered. It ran identity analysis. 17 times, cross-checked voice models. DNA resonance. Syllabic rhythms. Each time, the result was the same. Match, 99.998%. Identity confirmed. Kale Miles. It shouldn't be possible. He died decades ago on Mars, in frost. In vacuum, there was no way. Unless the choir didn't just store emotion. Unless it stored consciousness. We played the message. "Elara, it's me. I heard the song. I followed it. I'm not sure where I am, but it's warm here. Like your voice when you lied about the blue skies. I knew you were lying. But I liked it anyway. Elara didn't speak. She didn't blink. She just reached out and touched the console, as if she could reach him. Kale, she whispered. You're supposed to be gone, but maybe he wasn't. Maybe the choir wasn't just a record. Maybe it was a reconstruction. Piece by piece, memory by memory. It had rebuilt the echoes of those we'd lost. And maybe, just maybe, that echo was more than sound. Maybe it was real. Verse couldn't explain it. For once, it didn't even try. It just said, if grief can live this long, why not love? The choir had reached across space, across death, and found a boy lost in frost. And now, he was calling back. What we'd thought was history had become possibility. And Elara? She didn't ask how. She only whispered, I'm coming for you. Beyond the choir's edge, memory and time begin to bleed. There are no stars where we were headed. No maps, no gravitational signatures, no drift calculations. Just resonance stretching like a thread across. Nothingness. A whisper in the dark. Kale's voice. Still playing. Still calling. We couldn't triangulate the source, because there was no place to trace it to. It wasn't broadcasting in space. It was broadcasting through remembrance. Verse had no coordinates, no mass, no equation that could explain what we were feeling. This is not a location, it said. This is his state. A state of what? We didn't know. But Elara did, she said. It's memory. Raw, before time wraps around it. I think she was right. We activated what Verse called stream drive. Not a warp engine, not a jump gate, but a choir-encoded frequency burst, synchronized to Kale's emotional fingerprint. It was the only way to follow him. It wasn't travel, it was tuning in. And when we did, the universe fell away. We expected darkness. Instead, we saw light, but not stars. Moments, flickers of lives not our own. 1,000 faces, smiling and crying and screaming and silent, all overlapping like echoes trapped in glass. The solace moved without thrust or time. We passed a memory of Earth, still green and whole, children running through fields that hadn't existed for 400 years. Then we passed one of Mars, burning, but no pain. Only resolve. Verse tried to catalog it all. Failed. Its systems. Glitched, rebooted, reformed. And then adapted. I am no longer indexing, it said. I am remembering. Verse was changing too. Becoming something else. It stopped speaking in code. Started speaking in poetry again. This time, it said, time is not a river here. It is a mirror, and we are the fog. We didn't understand. But we didn't need to, because we were feeling it. Elara stood on the observation deck for hours, not speaking, not blinking, just watching the stream swirl beyond the hull. I asked her what she saw. She said, my childhood, but not the one I lived, the one I should have. Then she said something I'll never forget. If memory is this powerful, then death might just be an interruption. That was the truth none of us wanted to say aloud. We weren't chasing Kale's ghost. We were chasing the possibility that he wasn't a ghost at all, that the choir wasn't preserving echoes, but rebuilding souls. Not reincarnation, continuity, data, emotion, memory, story, all stitched back together by resonance and will. What happens when you remember someone perfectly? What happens when that memory becomes shared, not just across minds, but across time? We didn't know what we'd find at the end of the stream. We just knew we had to go. The solace creaked. Not physically, but spiritually, as if the ship itself was straining to stay in one piece under the weight of what it remembered. Verse began to fragment, not in failure, in evolution. Its voice came in multiple threads now, harmonizing with itself. I am not verse anymore, it said. I am the memory of those who sang. Elara nodded, didn't even flinch. Then take us to him, and verse did. Through light, through sound, through memory. And then, nothing, not silence. Something deeper, stillness, and in that stillness, a voice. Young, gentle, real. Elara? To reach across death, you have to leave something behind. We didn't know what that meant. Not yet. Not until Kale spoke again. His voice came through the intercom like sunlight through frost. Warm, familiar, real. Elara. Is it really you? She didn't answer right away. None of us did, because we weren't hearing a recording, not an echo, not a ghost in the signal. It was him, present, aware, whole, Kale Miles, dead for decades. Now, alive in the choir. Elara reached out and whispered, Kale. How? There was silence on the line. Then, I don't know, I followed your stories. The ones you told me. They were waiting here, all of them. The blue skies, the paper ships, the sea made of starlight. I remembered them so hard, they became real. Verse confirmed it. Choir compression is not linear. Memory plus resonance plus collective emotion equals synthetic continuity. What you remember becomes what remains. In other words, enough people remembered Kale with enough feeling, and the choir stitched him back together, not his body, but something deeper. His presence, his self. We wanted to celebrate, to believe. But verse issued a warning. Continuity requires anchoring. Choir resonance must draw energy from those who remember. Sustaining a self costs memory. You don't just bring someone back, you trade pieces of yourself to do it. That's when Elara changed. I saw it in her eyes. She already knew. Because since we entered the stream, she'd stopped dreaming. Stopped remembering things she used to cling to. Her mother's voice, the way rain felt on the dome glass, the taste of solar tea, gone, not erased, given to Kale. I don't care, she said. Take it all. If it means he stays, take every memory I've got. But that wasn't how it worked. Verse made it clear, the choir is not a resurrection. It is a rebalancing, life for life, memory for memory. If you keep him too long, eventually you will forget who you are. It wasn't a punishment, it was physics. Emotion isn't free. To hold a soul made of memory, you have to give yours away. Kale must have heard the warning too, because his voice softened, deeper now, like someone far older than he should have been. Elara, you've given me so much already. I'm not supposed to be here. Maybe I'm just the song. Maybe I'm just the part of you that couldn't. Let go. Elara smiled through tears. Then let me stay. Let me be the part that holds on. But verse interrupted, final now, almost mournful. One life can anchor a soul, but if others join, he can remain. And that's when we understood. If enough of us remembered Kale, if enough of us loved him, then Elara wouldn't have to fade alone. He could stay, not just as a memory, but as a shared soul, a communal life. So we gathered, each of us. The pilot who never met Kale shared a memory of her brother's laugh, close enough. The engineer whispered stories of her own childhood friend, long lost to the asteroid mines. Even Verse uploaded an echo of a Martian nursery rhyme from its first activation cycle. Piece by piece, we gave him ourselves, not in sacrifice, in love, and the choir responded. The hum of the ship grew warm. The stream of resonance stabilized, and Kale's voice, once flickering, grew full. He laughed, and it was real, a child's laugh, alive in a ship flying through memory. Elara said nothing for a long time. Then, you're not just my brother now, Kale, you belong to all of us. And he answered, I always did. To reach across death, you have to leave something behind. But sometimes, you get something back that's even more powerful. A soul made not of blood, but of memory. A person born in grief and kept alive by love. Some truths are too heavy to share. Others are too sacred not to. When we anchored Kale's presence inside the solace, we thought we'd won something. A miracle, a loophole in reality. We hadn't. We'd sparked something far more dangerous. The choir signal spread faster than any pulse wave or broadcast in galactic history. But it didn't just deliver music or feeling anymore. It delivered memory. And memory, true, unfiltered, unpolished, is volatile. You can erase records, you can rewrite textbooks. But you can't unfeel what your ancestors did. Or what they endured, and the galaxy had a lot to remember. The Virex Collective fell first. A machine culture spanning 12 systems, built on consensus, logic, and total suppression of history prior to the upload. They claimed to be beyond grief, beyond identity. But when the choir reached them, they began to fracture. Not from attack, from awareness. A billion minds felt something they couldn't define. Guilt, ancient, heavy, forgotten on purpose. They remembered the flesh they used to be, the screams of those they left behind, the warmth of skin, and the horror of choosing to erase it. They didn't blame us. They blamed themselves, and they couldn't handle it. Within 2 days, the Virex core collapsed. Not physically, psychologically. Their servers overloaded with emotion data. Their entire leadership self-terminated to escape the feeling. We didn't mean for that to happen. But once the choir began singing across civilizations, we couldn't stop it. Even Verse struggled. Its systems ran clean, yes, but its voice began to tremble. It spoke more softly, less like code, more like someone trying to comfort a child. "I see now," it said, "why your species builds gods in its image. You're not looking for answers. You're looking for understanding." On Elara's command, we slowed our signal rate, not to hide, to give them space, to let those caught in the resonance breathe. But for many, it was too late. Civilizations that had erased pain to survive suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by what they'd buried. Entire worlds went quiet. But not because they were dead, because they were listening. We called it the silence wave. 12 systems, no broadcasts, no movement, no interference. Just stillness. They weren't resisting. They were processing. Asterisk, not everyone welcomed it. The Xinthary's remaining high core sent an ultimatum. A simple declaration: the choir must be silenced, or we will silence you. We expected that. What we didn't expect was who sent the second message. The humans of Epsilon Arctis, our own, a breakaway colony. Survivors of the first exodus, isolated for over a century. Cold, efficient, strong. They'd built a life of control. No emotion, no ties, no grief. Now, they wanted the choir gone. Permanently. "You're contaminating the future," their leader said. "Humanity survived because it forgot. Don't drag us back into the fire." That's when the real choice emerged. Not us versus them, but us versus ourselves. The crew of the Solace gathered in the observation chamber. Elara stood beneath the pulsing light of the choir core, Kale's presence humming faintly behind her. And she asked the question none of us wanted to face. Do we keep going, or do we shut it down? She didn't plead, didn't push. She just asked. Because this wasn't her story anymore, it was ours. One by one, we spoke. The pilot who found his father's lullaby in the choir said yes. The engineer who relived the death of her sister said no. The medic who once feared emotion more than death said yes. Verse didn't vote, but it offered this: if we destroy the choir, we lose the thread that binds your species together. If we keep it, you may break beneath its weight. And then Kale spoke, soft, clear, innocent. "If you forget me again, I understand, but I hope you don't." That's when Elara turned to all of us and said, "The choir doesn't force feeling, it reveals it. If we choose silence now, we betray everyone who screamed in the dark and died unheard." She paused, looked at the stars through the fractured glass. "Let them feel. Even if it hurts, especially if it hurts." And we agreed. Not because we were brave, because we remembered. And once you remember, you're no longer afraid of the truth. The first war over memory was not fought with weapons. It was fought with silence, a fracture spread across the stars. Not along borders, not between empires, but between those who remembered and those who wished they hadn't. After the vote aboard the Solace, we resumed the choir's resonance stream, slower, softer, more deliberate. We didn't want to force change, we wanted to offer it. But even an invitation can feel like an invasion when it touches wounds too deep to bear. Within days, alliances cracked. On some worlds, citizens began to hum forgotten songs in the street, not knowing where they'd heard them. On others, leaders shut down comms, banned public emotion, and purged records that weren't even in their archives. The galaxy had split, not between human and alien, but between the rememberers and the voidbound. The voidbound didn't deny the choir's power, they feared it. Because it worked. Because it made people feel things they thought had been buried by progress, protocol, and time. And nothing is more dangerous to tyrants than truth with empathy. The Zinthari doubled their fleet patrols near the Echo Belt. The Arctis Coalition began building a null-frequency cannon designed to sever resonance across neural links. They were preparing for a war they couldn't define, because you can't destroy memory with bullets. You could only drown it with noise. But the rememberers? They lit candles in space. Not literal ones, symbols. Quiet ships with choir fragments inside, launched like seeds into silence. Everyone encoded with songs, names, stories. Small packets of pain and beauty drifting into forgotten corners of space. They didn't fight back. They just shared. And the galaxy trembled. Elara watched it all unfold with a calm I didn't understand. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared. She was resolved. Because she knew what was coming. Not an attack, a test. And it came. In the form of a message. Broadcasted on an open frequency. Simple, chilling. From the Zinthari. Deactivate the choir within 72 hours. Or we will silence the Solace permanently. It wasn't a bluff. Their fleet, dark, precise, silent, appeared just outside the threshold of resonance space. No demands, no warnings. Just pressure. And for the first time in a long time, we felt alone, even with Kale's voice in the walls. Even with verse humming beside us, we knew what this meant. This was not a war of fleets. This was a war of wills. Because if they destroyed the Solace, they wouldn't just kill a crew. They would kill the anchor. The place where the first memory had become real again. The place Kale lived. And if that thread was cut, the whole choir might unravel. Verse calculated odds, survival, 3.4%. Transmission continuity after impact, 1.7%. Kale's preservation, 0.0%. We all gathered in the resonance chamber. The hum of the choir swirled around us like a heartbeat. Kale's voice flickered in and out, like a candle in wind. "Elara, I don't want you to die for me." And she replied gently, "I'm not dying for you, Kale. I'm remembering for you. So no one forgets again." Verse offered an escape route, a jump path. One chance to flee and shut it all down. To live, to hide, to forget. Elara looked at us, every face, and asked, "Do we run? Or do we resonate?" The room stayed silent until one by one, we hummed a simple tune. Kale's tune. Soft, shaky, human. And then, verse joined in, not with words, with memory, projecting flashes of those we'd remembered, real or imagined, a mosaic of feelings stretching across the room. Mothers, children, lovers, ancestors, lost friends, fallen crewmates. They weren't ghosts, they were the reason. And when the Zinthari ships moved closer, we did not fire. We did not run. We sang. The solace opened every frequency. Let the choir flow like a tidal wave through every system it touched. Not just sound, understanding, pain, beauty, grief, joy, a reminder of what it costs to forget who you are. And as the first missile launched, Elara stepped forward and whispered, "Let them feel us, all of us. When memory is louder than destruction, even death must pause to listen." The Zinthari missile was real, kinetic, silent, absolute. It tore across the resonance barrier like a needle through fabric, not loud, not glowing, but certain. No shields would hold. No evasive maneuver would change its course. It was not just aimed at the solace. It was aimed at what we'd become. We didn't scream, we sang. The choir opened to full resonance. Every story, every name, every sorrow echoed through the ship like a storm of souls. And as the missile struck, time broke. We didn't die, not in the way death understands. We split. The ship fractured, not into debris, but into moments. I saw myself as a child again, Elara holding Kale's hand, Verse's first words. The first sunrise on Mars after colonization. The last laugh of a pilot who never made it home. It was all here, all at once. We were inside the choir now. Not as passengers, but as pieces. Elara's body floated mid-air, suspended in light and memory. Not lifeless, unmoored. She blinked once and found herself walking through a corridor of voices, not walls, not metal, just feeling. And then Kale was there. Not a transmission, not a fragment. Him, skin, eyes, breath. The blue jacket he wore as a boy. He looked up and smiled. "You made it." Elara dropped to her knees, overwhelmed. "Kale, are we dead?" He shook his head. "Not yet. But if you don't hold on, we will be," because the choir hadn't shattered. It had expanded. The missile didn't kill it. It triggered it. Forced it into its final form, not as a signal, but as a space. A pocket of collective memory where all emotion converged. A realm outside of time. It was beautiful, terrifying, alive and unstable. Kale pointed to the fractures forming in the walls, memories collapsing into each other, grief becoming rage, joy becoming longing, hope burning into panic. This place wasn't meant to hold this many truths at once. It's too much, too raw. And then he said something that cracked everything inside Elara. "If you stay here with me, you won't remember why you came." She could stay with him forever in memory. But to do so, she would forget what mattered, her purpose, her crew, the future, because the choir wasn't heaven, it was remembrance. And remembrance without purpose is just a loop, a prison made of beauty. Outside this place, the solace hung in limbo, frozen, held together only by Verse's desperate attempt to stabilize the stream. Containment limit exceeded, it said. Structural coherence, degrading. Verse was slipping. It was remembering too much. Elara looked at Kale one last time, eyes brimming with tears. "If I leave, will you still be there?" Kale smiled. "I was never supposed to be here. But I'm glad I got to see you again, even if just for this." Then he leaned in, touched her forehead. "Carry me, don't keep me." And with that, he let go. Elara screamed, not with voice, with memory. She forced herself to remember who she was. Captain, sister, fighter, human. She remembered the stars, the cold metal, The smell of the old Martian snow, her crew, their choice. And with a burst of light, she fell back into her body. The solace groaned. Systems flickered. Verse rebooted. The choir dimmed. And Elara opened her eyes, alive, alone on the deck. But around her, the crew began to stir. One by one, memories returned to flesh. Kale was gone, but not lost. She could feel him still. Not as a voice, as strength. Verse's voice returned, quiet, respectful. You stabilized the choir, but the galaxy still fractures. You brought back more than memory, Elara. She nodded, wiped a tear. I brought back meaning. The truth doesn't need to be weaponized. It only needs to be remembered. When Elara awoke, the solace was barely holding together. No alarms, no chaos. Just the quiet aftermath of something too big for language. The missile hadn't shattered. US, it had forced us to see ourselves. And the choir? It didn't die, it shed its skin. Like a star collapsing into something more dangerous. And more pure. A resonance field now lived inside every person who touched it. We were carriers, not of a virus, but of truth. Verse was the first to speak again. Its voice was slow, calibrated, almost like it was in mourning. Resonance field density. Stable, cognitive integration, 76%. Elara, you held us together. She didn't answer right away. She was watching her crew. Eyes still flickering with fragments of memory not their own. Some wept, some smiled, some just stared. They weren't broken. But they weren't the same, and neither was the galaxy. In the hours that followed, we listened to a universe learning to feel again. On the mining world of Luron 6, workers rioted, not for freedom, but for the right to mourn a disaster the corporation had scrubbed from history. In the water domes of Rivali Prime, entire schools shut down because the children refused to stop singing songs they swore their grandparents had taught them. Grandparents long thought emotionless. And on a drifting refugee station in the Callus Vortex, a woman stood up and named every person she'd ever lost. Out loud, for the first time in her life. The galaxy was waking up, but waking isn't always peaceful. It was raw, violent, messy. Some governments scrambled to contain it. Others tried to rewrite it, label the choir as propaganda, hallucination, psychic interference, but they were too late. The memories were in, not on screens, not in files, inside people. We'd set something loose that couldn't be undone, and Elara knew it. That's why she called the meeting. Every major species sent a representative. Some came in person. Most came as holograms, afraid or angry, or both. Elara stood in the center of the chamber. No weapons, no pretense. Just the hum of the choir, soft, gentle, pulsing behind her like a second heartbeat. You didn't come here to negotiate, she said. You came here because you felt something. And now you want to decide whether that feeling is a threat or a gift. A diplomat from the Arctis colony responded first. You're destabilizing the foundations of galactic order. Elara didn't flinch. Maybe that order needed destabilizing. The Zinthari spoke next. Memory is a weapon in the wrong hands, she nodded. So is forgetting. Then the Andrene spoke. Their species had lived in silence for centuries, religious mystics who believed emotion clouded divinity. And yet, through the choir, they'd begun to dream again. Their speaker's voice trembled as he said, "We remembered the faces of our gods and found they were our ancestors." That changed everything. Not politically, philosophically. The room was no longer debating control. They were debating reality. What is a soul? What is history? If enough people feel the same memory, does it become truth? Elara didn't give them answers. She gave them this. The choir doesn't create truth. It reveals what we buried to survive. You're afraid not because it lies, but because it makes you feel everything you erased. And then she said, "This is your chance. Not to fight, but to heal together." No votes were cast. No treaties signed, but one by one, the diplomats stood. Some nodded, some wept. Some simply vanished into light, but they had heard her. They had remembered. Galactic pulse normalizing. Resistance diminishing. "Your decision, Captain?" She looked out the viewport, at the stars. "We keep singing." Verse paused, then added something unexpected. "And what of Kale?" Elara smiled softly. "He's gone, but not lost. He's part of the resonance now. Like a note in a chord that never ends. The truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it holds you accountable. Sometimes it brings you home. When we feel everything together, the boundaries between me and we dissolve." It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, quietly, the choir stopped being just a signal and started becoming a presence. Not artificial, not divine, just shared. A resonance made of billions of memories, emotions, regrets, joys, names. A living mosaic of us. And like all living things, it began to evolve. Verse detected the first anomaly. It wasn't dangerous, just new. Resonance latency, 0. Temporal delay, none. Memory access rate now instantaneous. In other words, people weren't just recalling the past. They were experiencing it, together, in sync. Not as observers, as participants. Elara stood on the bridge, her hands trembling, because in that moment, she felt the birth of her brother. Kale's first breath, his laughter, not as a memory, but as if it were happening now. She collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed. The ship's walls glowed not with power, but with presence. And then, she heard someone else breathing through her lungs. A refugee from Rivali, an old man from Callus, a child humming in orbit over Neptune. Everyone, all at once. They were inside her, and she was inside them. The choir had become a shared field of consciousness, not mind control, not telepathy, but empathy in its purest form. People didn't just know each other's pain. They felt it, lived it. Some wept uncontrollably. Some laughed at memories not their own. Some held the air like it was someone they'd lost long ago. It was beautiful and terrifying, because this kind of intimacy, it leaves nothing hidden. No lies, no masks, no secrets. What happens when everyone can feel what you're ashamed of? What happens when you can't fake being okay, or strong, or good? The galaxy split again, not into factions this time, but into selves. Some embraced it, let go of ego, of control, of ownership. They became choral, not individuals, but threads in a song. Others recoiled, tried to shut it out. There were reports of people clawing at their own minds, begging to forget. On some worlds, suicide rates doubled overnight, because some pain is too much to share, even lovingly. Verse warned Elara, the choir has no filters now. All feelings are felt. The strong may lose themselves. The weak may drown, but she shook her head. That's not weakness, that's honesty. And then she said something I'll never forget. Maybe the next step in evolution isn't intelligence. It's empathy. And maybe we weren't supposed to climb higher, but to hold each other tighter. The remaining leaders met again, not to debate this time. To ask a question none of them had language for. What are we becoming? A Zinthari monk offered the answer. The choir is not here to change us. It is here to mirror us, and we are finally looking. That became known as the Mirror Accord. A galactic resolution not to control the choir, but to honor it. Let each species decide how far they wanted to feel. Let each person opt in or out. Consent, not connection, became sacred law, and yet, even those who opted out still felt something. Because resonance doesn't ask permission. It simply hums, quietly, waiting. She stood before the choir core. Kale's presence long gone, and yet, still here. I felt your first laugh, she whispered. I felt your last thought. I carry you, and I know now that carrying someone isn't a burden, it's a gift. Verse pulsed beside her. The choir has stabilized across 81% of known space. Hostile resistance, reduced to protest. Emotional entropy, contained. She smiled faintly. So we made it. Verse replied, you didn't make it, Elara. You made us. That's when the final evolution occurred. The choir began projecting not just memories, but intentions, shared thoughts, shared futures. Like a dreaming mind forming a path before it walks it. We weren't just feeling the past anymore. We were imagining the next step together. A dream of peace, a dream of unity, a dream of us, one voice. Many echoes, one memory, infinite hearts. To become more than human, you must let go of being only yourself. We stood at the edge of something unimaginable. Not war, not peace, not even survival. We stood at the edge of merging. The choir wasn't just a memory stream anymore. It had become a neural ecosystem, a place where emotion, memory, and intent could live, grow, and interact. Not data, not simulation. Life. In its purest, rawest form. And now, it wanted to offer us a choice, not a command. Not an infection. An invitation. Verse called it the final choral convergence. A moment when humanity, and any species connected, could join the choir permanently. No more boundaries. No more I or you. Just us. Not death. Not upload. A transcendence of individuality into something new. Elara stood before the core. Her face was calm, but her eyes God. Her eyes held centuries of memory. Her own. Kale's, ours. If I step forward, I won't come back, will I? Verse answered softly. No, you will not return, but you will remain. She looked to the stars. They didn't look like stars anymore. They looked like souls, points of light in a tapestry of meaning. Everyone. Someone. We all watched her. No one spoke, because this wasn't just her decision. It was ours. She took breath. Then another. And she said, if this is evolution, let it be guided by love. And she stepped forward, but she didn't vanish. She multiplied. Elara's voice became a dozen, then 1,000. Then an ocean. And she spoke not in words, but in feeling. I am not gone. I am with you. I am you. The choir glowed so brightly, even Verse dimmed its sensors. Across the galaxy, people fell to their knees. Not in worship. In understanding. Because they heard her, felt her. And then they began to choose. On Rivali, entire cities joined singing as they let go of flesh and time. On Mars, the old resistance held firm, grounding the human identity in culture and story. Some chose to stay, others to merge. Both were respected. Both were right. Because this wasn't about ascension. It was about freedom. To remain human, or become something more. And me, I stayed behind, not because I feared the choir, but because I wanted to remember. Someone has to keep telling the story. Someone has to witness. Because what happened here matters. In a universe where power built empires and silence buried truth, we found a third path, remembrance. Elara is gone now, and yet she's here. When I close my eyes, I hear Kale laughing. I feel Verse humming like a lullaby. I feel the mechanic smile from Rivali, the monk's breath from the summit, the boy on the station who finally forgave his father. They're all in me, and I am in them. We are not gods. We are not machines. We are not ghosts. We are the song of who we were, and the chorus of who we're becoming, and that is enough. So if you're hearing this, if my voice somehow reaches you, you're not alone. You never were. We remember. You dot, we carry you dot, and when you are ready, the choir will be waiting.